G'day guys, welcome back to another video. In this video we'll be talking about the famously or infamously topic that is going around currently, the topic of de-dollarization, and I will very simply be explaining exactly what de-dollarization means, what's happening in today's modern world, what are we going to see, the further changes in the next sort of 5 to 10 years period, maybe even 50 years look ahead, and we're going to be talking about how this process is going to take place. If this process does happen, this is going to be a monumental change within our global environment, within our global geopolitical economics, and it is extremely pertinent to understand the topic. In my previous video, I explained how the US and the US dollar itself became the world superpower and became the world's reserve currency, which means essentially reserve currency just essentially means how the US dollar was the only hegemony. There was nothing really above it. You could use the US dollar to destabilize economies, to trade, and for numerous other things. But now, since US obviously has been exploiting this problem, this power of theirs around the world, there's a lot of countries who do not want to play by these rules. So what they're doing is trying to expedite the period of de-dollarization. Now, before I start, I also want to mention that this is some of the thoughts and explanations from what I have read, from my understanding, and from the research that I've conducted. So let's get into it. Like I mentioned, a lot of countries are getting in the process where they want de-dollarization to happen, but we'll also discuss how America is also one of those countries that really wants de-dollarization to happen. They have been planning for de-dollarization for the last year and a bit, where they want the value of the dollar to come significantly low as to what it is at the moment. We know during COVID period they had multiple stimulus packages, and so America was just printing money non-stop, and then out of nowhere the amount of money that was in the market got tightened because of the quantitative tightening which the Fed, which our RBA also puts into place to reduce the liquidity in the market, so the money flows stop and the prices drop, which helps to reduce the level of inflation. So with the process of quantitative tightening, de-dollarization also got impacted because the value of the dollar exceeded to the levels that America simply doesn't want, because obviously all the global trade, well, not all, but majority of the global trade, once upon a time, about 60% of the global trade used to happen in dollars. Petrodollar agreement, which we're going to discuss in this video as well, but as I mentioned in the last video, was an agreement between all the Middle Eastern, all the Gulf countries, and America and other world, that the petrol around the world will only be sold in US dollars, which again boosted the value of US dollars, which was impacting the value of US dollar and going up in price. But like I mentioned, that every single trade in the world happens in US dollar, and when US is importing a significant amount of products, merchandise within their country, they have to pay that same rate for US dollar, which obviously is hurting their economy. As we know, they have a huge debt problem, debt crisis, and this is further impacting their problem. Now, there are again 3 parts to this conversation, which we're going to get into, which is helping the de-dollarization product, the de-dollarization campaign, and further how they're being impacted. I've broken it down into multiple factors. So first, let's get into it. The petrodollar agreement, as we spoke about, is no longer existent, right? So China became the first country to be like, no, you know what, Saudi, you know what, Iran or other Gulf countries, if you want to trade with me, we're going to be trading in my currency, yuan. We're not going to be trading oil in US dollars, which impacted the US de-dollarization process, which has accelerated the process. The second one is gold stacking. Now, everyone is obviously aware that gold prices are going up because of, no one really knows why exactly, but I'll explain in this video why they're going up. But firstly, we need to understand gold stacking is also impacting de-dollarization, because Russia has now pegged their ruble to dollar because they have a monumental amount of gold reserves. I think they have about circa 2,000 plus metric tons of gold reserves, that's why they have pegged their dollar to ruble, because we have seen in 2022, or people who don't know, America blocked $300 billion or probably more worth of Russian assets which were converted into US dollars. Obviously they have control over US dollars, being the country. They have frozen those assets so that Russia can no longer touch those to fuel their war. So gold stacking obviously is being implemented by Russia, where therefore they have pegged their ruble to the gold, which is helping their currency and the economy in some instances. The other one is loss of confidence, which I explained in my previous video. The confidence within a asset class or within a currency is what makes it the superpower, what makes it stand within the market. Now we're seeing that the value of dollar is decreasing and expediting the process of de-dollarization because of also lack of confidence into USA. People no longer see USA as the only unilateral superpower in the world. It's a multipolar world. We're seeing multiple powers arise, and one of them being China and other one being Russia. I'm going to make a separate video about that, but let's get back to this. So the petrodollar agreement is, again, this is a second branch, which is the US Treasury bills. So I will be putting a graph into this video where you can see that the US Treasuries, firstly, let's explain. US Treasury simply is a debt instrument which the US government issues, which the feds issue to other countries, to their domestic market, so that people can buy and then pay them for it, and then they get a certain amount of yield, which is different to interest rate, over a certain period of time when the bond is matured, when the US Treasury is matured. That's what simply it means. Why does the government do that? They do that so that they can bring in money into their government, into their country, so they can, maybe build infrastructure, maybe fuel some of the other things where they're lacking. Here, in this instance, the government of USA was issuing US Treasury bonds to obviously fuel more money, and they were getting about $1 trillion to $2 trillion worth of US Treasury being sold to various countries, some of them being Japan, China, India, Russia, and that money that was coming through with those Treasury US bills, US was essentially paying off their debts, which was not helping them because their debt is still $37 trillion as we speak. So this case didn't really help. But this was one of the formats where US Treasury would issue the bills out, and then they would get paid for it, and then they would use that money. There's a lot of countries that do that. They issue Treasury bills. Even Australia does it, where they issue it so that they can use that money into building infrastructure, which a country should do technically, and then they get paid on the maturity. The people who buy into it, the finance gurus, not finance gurus essentially, but like the big sort of hedge funds and other funds, they buy these and then they obviously get paid onto it at a certain maturity time. What's happening with this is that a lot of the countries are now backing out. A lot of the countries, like I said, I'll put the graph up. A lot of the countries are selling these US Treasury bills. They no longer want to keep this because we have seen in 2022, like I mentioned, USA frees a huge amount of assets of Russia, which were obviously bought from US Treasury bills. So a lot of the countries like China, India, and Japan, and all the other countries that have huge amounts of US Treasury bills said, wait a second, this guy could actually freeze my assets as well if I keep pouring money into it. So they started selling US Treasury. So US Treasury, like we said, is backed by US dollars as well, is no longer valid. It is losing value, and perhaps that's the reason why de-dollarization is also taking its pace. The second point, like I said, is gold stacking. Now, like I mentioned, why is the gold prices going up? It is not because gold, all of a sudden everyone wants to invest into gold. It is because it has become one of the safest investment, but also above all, in this volatile world, above all of this, why it's taking a huge amount of rally is because BRICS, which I mentioned in my previous video, and some of the other powerful countries around the world, like China, like Russia, like India, are investing directly into gold now. They are buying huge amounts of gold reserves because of the fact that they know that there is no other safe haven. If they buy gold, they can back their currency to gold and still be useful in the times ahead where the world is looking extremely volatile. So we are seeing, I'll put another graph here where we will see that Russia has bought a huge amount of gold, about 2,000 metric tons, China as well, and so has India, and then Turkey we're seeing as well below it. They are all investing into a huge amount of gold, which you know, obviously gold is limited. There isn't a huge amount of gold, so that's why it is a scarce asset. That's why all the countries are investing into it, so that they can back their currency into it. Very complicated, but that's why the gold is making its gold rally, like we specifically say. And is it a good time to invest into gold? I don't know. You need to do your own research, but obviously investing into gold, ETFs or other forms of gold will obviously certainly help you, because all the other current countries around the world are seeing that they need to find another alternative to the de-dollarization of the US dollar. They need to find another way or method to keep their currency running. That's why they're investing into gold, and we'll see what happens ahead. Now, obviously, there are also speculations about the market crash because gold is going up, because every time gold has gone up historically in 1929, just before the market crash, in 1970, when the oil crisis happened because of the Gulf War, in 2008 when the real estate market crashed, and again in 2020 when COVID hit, we saw all these multiple years where we have seen the economy came down collapsing, and the only thing that surged a year before that was gold. So that is another reason, but I don't think that's going to happen because of a simple factor called QE, quantitative easing. The government will just keep printing money to stimulate the market and reduce the level of inflation. Well, you know what, it's not going to reduce the level of inflation. It may even fire up the inflation even further, but to get out of a crisis, to get out of a market crash, because now the market crash, if it happens, would be way widespread and it will be way more worse than what it was back in the years. So I think the government will do anything and everything to stop the crash from happening, and the only thing that they see happening is keep churning that machine, to keep printing papers. The loss of confidence is an extremely, just a psychological point. It's nothing to do with the global economy itself. It's got to do with the fact that, for example, if you see Bitcoin these days, right? Bitcoin is obviously, by the way, surging as well, and so is silver within the gold stacking part of the video. But the thing is with loss of confidence is that, you know, for anyone who will be investing into a certain type of asset class or into a certain thing, they're only going to do so because the other person has done and has made money. That's just how the world works. You don't invest into something, you don't buy something if the other person hasn't, because that's how the validation comes. So a simple point with the loss of confidence here is that USA firstly has a huge amount of debt, which is $37 trillion. Their sovereign debt is just massive. So that's not going anywhere. They don't have any way to just make it just disappear. At the moment, as we speak, they may be doing some things, but I don't get a grasp of it. I don't understand it. They have been evaluating and reevaluating gold and Bitcoin and try to make a huge new reserve currency, but who knows where this is going to go, because what we're seeing is that there are multipolar things happening around the world. There is China, there's Russia, there is USA. So there is not a unilateral, there is no singular power in the world anymore. There are multiple powers. We're seeing all these multiple powers want to make their certain decisions which are best for their economy. So I don't see how those two economies, being Russia and China, are going to support this de-dollarization and replace it with something that US beholds the most, which is Bitcoin. I just don't see it happening. But I could be wrong. We'll find out in the future. But the whole point of loss of confidence is that, firstly, US has a huge amount of debt. Secondly, they have chewed, I guess, a little bit more than what they can dissolve with the tariff situation. Thirdly, we have seen that they have again implemented tariffs on China, which is because China has blocked their rare earth minerals. Well, they have blocked entirely about 12 rare earth minerals out of the 16, and they just don't want to do, give you the rare earth minerals so that you can go ahead and produce your things, and they're the most important things, right? So rare earth minerals, because that you can make EVs, you can make your arms and ammunitions, you can make multiple things. Everything is dependent on that, which China is sitting on a stack of and knows how to actually extract them into something useful, which no other country in the world actually knows. They run a monopoly of extracting rare earth minerals and putting it into the places that are needed, putting it into areas that are needed. Now, to learn that technology, it's going to alone take 25 years for any other country, which is a huge amount of time. By the time 25 years lapse and someone comes up with that technology, one of the other countries, China's way far ahead, and they've done already whatever that needs to be done through with those rare earth minerals, right? So we're seeing that the condition of America, which used to be a superpower at some point, which kind of still is, which keeps that status, is kind of losing power, and therefore is losing confidence, because they are no more the strongest person in the yard. So because of that loss of confidence, de-dollarization is taking a quicker pace and a quicker turnaround. This is still going to take a huge amount of time, right? Because there are still a lot of US dollar trades that happen, but a lot of the countries, including USA, want this process to take place as quick as possible. But usually something like this can take anywhere between 10 to 50 years. But anything in this world is possible. If there's a war, this timeline doesn't matter anymore, right? But this is something that is extremely monumental and very interesting that is happening in the geopolitical world, and I hope you understood this video. I'm going to be coming up with another video of explaining what the two sides between these geopolitical situation is and how it's going to pan out. So please keep watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.